Just when Jimin finally accepted that Jungkook had forgotten every promise they once shared, fate delivered a moment that shattered everything he believed. A single discovery left his heart frozen, while the silence Jungkook had carried for so long suddenly felt far more painful than betrayal itself. As guilt, regret, and unanswered questions collided, Taehyung stepped forward with a truth no one had seen coming. The revelation had the power to destroy everything, or heal wounds that had never truly closed. But when the whole story finally came to light, would Jimin find the strength to forgive, or had they already lost each other forever? Jimin had always believed that some bonds were too strong to be broken by time, distance, or even silence. Among all the people who had walked beside him through endless rehearsals, exhausting schedules, and unforgettable memories, Jungkook had become the one person whose quiet presence brought him comfort without a single word. Their connection had never depended on grand gestures. It lived in countless small moments that only they seemed to understand, from encouraging smiles after difficult performances to late-night conversations that helped them survive the pressure surrounding their lives. Everyone around them could see the trust they shared, even if neither of them ever tried to explain it. RM often admired how naturally they supported one another during the hardest days, while Jin joked that they always seemed to know exactly what the other was thinking. Sugar noticed the unspoken understanding that existed between them. J-Hope constantly encouraged them to protect the friendship they had built, and Taehyung quietly watched their bond with a smile, believing that some relationships were simply meant to endure every storm. For a long time, that belief seemed impossible to challenge. No matter how demanding life became, Jimin and Jungkook always found their way back to each other. Whether they were surrounded by thousands of cheering fans or sitting together in complete silence after another exhausting day, there was always an invisible promise that neither of them would ever face the weight of the world alone. That promise slowly became the foundation of Jimin's emotional strength. Whenever doubt crept into his heart, Jungkook's steady presence reminded him that he was never truly alone. Yet beneath the warmth of those peaceful days, something had already begun to change. It started so quietly that no one noticed. Jungkook became increasingly distracted, disappearing for hours without explanation and carrying an exhaustion that no amount of rest seemed able to erase. His smiles remained, but they no longer reached his eyes. He still stood beside Jimin whenever others were watching, yet somehow felt farther away than ever before. At first, Jimin convinced himself that it was only another demanding season filled with responsibilities. He told himself not to overthink the growing silence between them. Still, every unanswered message, every cancelled plan, and every distant glance left another small crack in the confidence he had always carried. The people around them sensed the subtle shift as well, though none of them understood its true cause. RM believed Jungkook was simply overwhelmed by personal burdens. Jin tried to lighten the atmosphere with humor that no longer produced genuine laughter. As the days slipped by, the silence between Jimin and Jungkook grew heavier than either of them could bear. What had once been effortless companionship slowly transformed into cautious distance, leaving every shared room filled with invisible tension. Jimin continued smiling whenever the others were around, but behind every expression hid a heart that was quietly breaking. He replayed every memory they had built together, desperately searching for the exact moment when everything had begun to fall apart. The more he searched, the more convinced he became that Jungkook had chosen to leave those memories behind. Unknown to Jimin, however, Jungkook was fighting a battle that demanded every ounce of his strength. He carried an overwhelming responsibility that forced him to keep his distance, believing that protecting Jimin meant enduring the pain alone. Every step away from Jimin felt like a betrayal of his own heart, yet he convinced himself there was no other choice. RM noticed the growing emotional divide and tried to bring everyone together through familiar routines, hoping shared moments would heal what words could not. Jin filled the atmosphere with laughter that faded almost as quickly as it appeared. Sugar watched quietly, sensing that the truth hiding beneath Jungkook's silence was far deeper than simple exhaustion. J-Hope refused to give up, encouraging everyone to stay united even as the emotional cracks widened. Only Taehyung carried a burden unlike anyone else's. He had discovered fragments of a truth that explained Jungkook's heartbreaking behavior, but it was a truth that was never his to reveal. Torn between loyalty and compassion, Taehyung remained silent, even as he watched Jimin slowly lose faith in the one person he trusted most. Then another unexpected incident pushed everything closer to the edge. Jimin stumbled upon undeniable evidence that seemed to prove Jungkook had intentionally erased every trace of their shared past. The discovery shattered the final hope he had desperately protected, convincing him that the promises they once treasured had meant far less to Jungkook than they had to him. Consumed by disappointment, Jimin quietly began pulling away before Jungkook could hurt him again. Neither of them realized that the greatest misunderstanding of their lives had only just begun, and that one hidden sacrifice would soon change everything forever. Every decision Jimin made after that was driven by the quiet conviction that holding on any longer would only deepen the pain. The weight of that misunderstanding soon became impossible to escape. Jimin buried himself in work, convincing everyone around him that he had simply become more focused, but the truth was far different. Every achievement felt strangely empty because the one person whose silent encouragement had always meant the most no longer stood beside him. Even in crowded rooms filled with familiar faces, loneliness wrapped around him like an invisible shadow. Jungkook experienced the same emptiness from the opposite side, silently carrying the consequences of a promise he believed he had no right to break. Every time he caught a glimpse of Jimin looking away before their eyes could meet, guilt settled deeper into his heart, reminding him that protecting someone sometimes came at the cost of being misunderstood forever. Gradually realized that this was no ordinary disagreement. Jin could no longer disguise the growing tension with humor. Sugar's quiet observations became increasingly troubled, and J-Hope refused to accept that such a meaningful bond could disappear without a reason. Taehyung, however, reached a breaking point of his own. The truth he had guarded for so long was no longer just hurting Jungkook, it was destroying Jimin from within. He began questioning whether loyalty meant keeping a painful secret or preventing two people from losing each other because of it. As those thoughts consumed him, fate arranged one final encounter that neither Jimin nor Jungkook could avoid. What was supposed to be an ordinary moment quickly transformed into the beginning of an emotional storm, and Taehyung realized that before the day came to an end, the secret hidden behind Jungkook's silence would finally have to be revealed, no matter how much it changed all of their lives forever. The air felt heavier than ever as destiny quietly brought them into the same place once again, surrounded by familiar faces yet separated by an emotional distance that seemed impossible to cross. Jimin stood only a few steps away from Jungkook, but it felt as though years of unanswered questions stretched between them. Neither of them dared to close the gap, each believing the other had already made a choice that could never be undone. Sensed the unbearable tension and watched in silence. Jin's usual warmth disappeared beneath growing concern. Sugar remained still as if waiting for the truth to reveal itself, and J-Hope silently hoped that one honest moment could still save everything. Taehyung, however, could no longer carry the burden alone. Every painful misunderstanding, every sleepless night, every silent sacrifice, and every tear that neither Jimin nor Jungkook allowed anyone else to see flashed through his mind at once. He realized that protecting a secret had only protected the lie surrounding it, while the people he cared about continued to suffer because they never knew what had really happened. Taking a slow breath, Taehyung finally made the decision he had feared for so long. Before another moment of silence could push them beyond the point of no return, he stepped forward, determined to uncover the heartbreaking truth that Jungkook had desperately hidden from everyone, a truth that would force Jimin to question everything he thought he knew and forever change the meaning of the silence he had mistaken for abandonment. As Taehyung gathered the courage to expose the truth, the atmosphere shifted in a way that none of them could ignore. Time seemed to slow, and every heartbeat echoed with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. Jimin's eyes remained fixed on the floor, convinced that nothing Taehyung could reveal would erase the pain of believing he had been forgotten. Jungkook, on the other hand, quietly closed his eyes for a brief moment, knowing that the secret he had carried alone was finally about to come into the light. For months, he had accepted the role of the one who would be misunderstood if it meant keeping someone else safe, believing that losing Jimin's trust was a price worth paying. But he had never imagined that the silence would wound Jimin so deeply that it would slowly erase the faith they had spent years building together. Taehyung could no longer watch two hearts break for a sacrifice that had never been recognized. With unwavering determination, he prepared to reveal the hidden chain of events that had forced Jungkook into impossible choices, a truth that had been carefully buried beneath guilt, fear, and unconditional loyalty. In a matter of moments, every painful memory Jimin had carried would be turned upside down, and the answer he had spent so long searching for would arrive in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. The truth began to unfold with a quiet force that stunned everyone into silence. Taehyung revealed that long before the distance had appeared, Jungkook had learned about a deeply personal situation that threatened to overwhelm someone Jimin loved dearly. Faced with a responsibility he could not ignore and bound by a promise he had made to protect that secret, Jungkook chose to carry the burden alone, believing that if Jimin knew the full reality, he would sacrifice everything without hesitation. Every unanswered message, every cancelled plan, every moment of painful distance had never been acts of indifference, but deliberate attempts to shield Jimin from a weight that Jungkook believed belonged only to him. He accepted being misunderstood because he thought it was the only way to keep Jimin's heart free from unnecessary guilt and impossible choices. Jimin stood frozen as every piece of the past rearranged itself inside his mind, and the weight of his own assumptions became almost unbearable. The loneliness he had carried for months was suddenly replaced by an even deeper ache, the realization that while he had been grieving the loss of someone he believed had abandoned him, Jungkook had been quietly sacrificing his own happiness to protect him from a burden he never wanted Jimin to bear. The guilt settled heavily in Jimin's heart, not because he had misunderstood, but because he now understood the unbearable loneliness Jungkook had endured without asking for sympathy or recognition. Jungkook never sought gratitude, never expected anyone to praise his sacrifice, and never once tried to defend himself, believing that true care sometimes meant accepting blame in silence if it kept someone else from suffering. Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope watched the emotional walls that had divided them begin to crumble, each realizing that trust had not disappeared at all, it had simply been buried beneath fear, silence, and impossible choices. Taehyung quietly stepped back, knowing his role was never to become the hero of the story, but to ensure that the truth reached the two people who needed it most. Although the pain of the past could never be erased, the honesty that finally emerged gave both Jimin and Jungkook something they had almost lost forever, the chance to rebuild their bond on a foundation stronger than before, one no longer dependent on assumptions but on the courage to face even the hardest truths together. From that day forward, they understood that silence could protect a secret, but it could also wound the people who mattered most, while trust could survive even the deepest misunderstandings when hearts were willing to choose forgiveness over pride. Their journey became a lasting reminder that the strongest relationships are not those that never break, but those that find the strength to heal after everything seems beyond repair, leaving behind a lesson that would stay with them, and with everyone who witnessed their story, for the rest of their lives. In the weeks that followed, healing did not arrive all at once, nor did it erase the scars that both of them carried. Instead, it appeared in quiet moments that slowly restored what silence had nearly destroyed. Jimin no longer searched for answers hidden behind distant expressions because he had finally learned that the truth could be far more complicated than what the heart feared in its loneliest moments. Jungkook also realized that carrying every burden alone was never the same as protecting the people he loved. By refusing to share his struggles, he had unknowingly allowed fear to replace trust and misunderstanding to replace the bond they had spent years building. Together they discovered that real loyalty was not measured by how much pain one person could endure in silence, but by the courage to let others stand beside them when life became too heavy to face alone. Jin, Sugar, J-Hope, and Taehyung watched the warmth gradually return, not through dramatic gestures, but through genuine understanding, patient forgiveness, and countless small moments that reminded everyone why their connection had always been worth fighting for. Although the memories of heartbreak would never completely disappear, they no longer served as reminders of loss. Instead, they became lasting proof that even the deepest misunderstandings could lead to stronger trust when honesty finally replaced fear. Looking back, Jimin realized that the greatest mistake had never been believing Jungkook had forgotten him, but believing that silence always meant the absence of love. And Jungkook understood that the greatest sacrifice was not hiding his pain, but finding the courage to share it before the people he loved began suffering because of it. Their story ended not with perfection, but with hope, leaving behind a powerful reminder that the strongest hearts are not those that never break. They are the ones brave enough to forgive, rebuild, and choose each other again, even after believing everything had already been lost. Long after the storm had passed, the memory of everything they endured remained etched into their hearts, not as a reminder of sorrow but as proof of how fragile even the strongest bonds could become when fear replaced honesty. Jimin often reflected on the days he had spent believing he was no longer important to Jungkook, realizing how easily silence had allowed doubt to rewrite years of unwavering trust. Jungkook carried his own lesson just as deeply, understanding that love and loyalty should never require complete isolation, because even the purest intentions could unintentionally hurt the people they were meant to protect. Taehyung quietly found peace in knowing that speaking the truth, despite the risk, had saved a friendship that was only moments away from disappearing forever. Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope witnessed firsthand that genuine relationships are never defined by the absence of conflict but by the willingness to confront pain together instead of allowing it to grow in the shadows. As life slowly returned to normal, the smiles they shared carried a new meaning, strengthened by hardships that had tested every part of their hearts. The memories of misunderstanding no longer held power over them because they had been transformed into a promise that neither silence nor fear would ever again stand between them. And perhaps the most unforgettable truth of all was that sometimes the person who seems to have forgotten you is actually the one sacrificing the most behind the scenes, reminding everyone that before giving up on someone they love, they should always search for the truth hidden beneath the silence, because one conversation can save a relationship that countless assumptions are capable of destroying forever. As their lives moved forward, the pain that had once defined every quiet moment gradually transformed into gratitude for the second chance they had almost never received. Every shared smile, every comforting glance, and every ordinary day together became a reminder that some relationships are not preserved by perfection, but by the willingness to keep choosing one another after disappointment, fear, and regret. Jimin carried a renewed appreciation for the people who stood beside him even when he could not see the full picture, while Jungkook embraced the understanding that true strength was never found in silent suffering but in allowing those who cared about him to share the weight of his burdens. Taehyung's courage to reveal the hidden truth became an unforgettable example that honesty, even when painful, can rescue hearts from years of unnecessary sorrow. Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope also walked away with a deeper respect for the fragile nature of trust, recognizing that even the closest bonds require openness, patience, and compassion to endure. In the end, their story was never simply about misunderstanding or sacrifice. It was about discovering that love, loyalty, and friendship are strongest when they are built on truth instead of fear. The silence that once separated them no longer carried sadness, because it had been replaced by an unspoken promise that no matter how difficult life became, they would never again allow assumptions to speak in place of honesty. And as the final chapter of their journey quietly came to a close, one timeless message remained. Before believing that someone has forgotten you, remember that the deepest acts of love are often the ones carried out in silence, unseen by the world, yet powerful enough to change a life forever. The echoes of their journey continued long after the tears had dried, leaving behind a story that would forever remind them of the extraordinary strength hidden within forgiveness. Every hardship they had endured became another thread woven into an unbreakable bond, proving that even hearts fractured by misunderstanding could find their way back to one another when truth was finally given a voice. Jimin no longer feared being forgotten, because he had learned that genuine love is not always loud or easy to recognize. Sometimes it hides behind difficult choices, painful silence, and sacrifices that remain invisible until the right moment. Jungkook no longer believed he had to carry every burden alone, understanding that the people who truly love you would rather face painful truths together than live peacefully inside a comforting illusion. Taehyung's unwavering courage changed the course of their lives forever, reminding everyone that revealing the truth may create temporary pain, but hiding it can destroy something far more precious. Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope witnessed the remarkable transformation with quiet gratitude, knowing they had seen not only a friendship restored but also two hearts rediscover the faith they had almost lost forever. In the end, the greatest revelation was never the secret itself, but the realization that trust is strengthened every time people choose understanding over judgment, compassion over pride, and honesty over fear. Their story closed with hope shining brighter than heartbreak, leaving behind one unforgettable message for anyone who had ever questioned the loyalty of someone they loved. Never let silence convince you that love has disappeared, because sometimes the strongest proof of devotion is hidden within the sacrifices no one else can see until the truth finally finds its way into the light. As the final pages of their journey quietly came to a close, Jimin and Jungkook stood not as two people untouched by pain, but as two souls forever transformed by it. The misunderstandings that had once threatened to tear them apart became the very foundation upon which they rebuilt an even stronger bond, one rooted in honesty, patience, and unwavering trust. Every tear they had shed, every sleepless night they had endured, and every silent sacrifice they had carried alone now held a different meaning, serving not as reminders of heartbreak but as symbols of resilience and unconditional loyalty. Taehyung's decision to reveal the truth would forever remain the turning point that saved two hearts from drifting apart forever, while Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope quietly celebrated the return of a friendship that had survived its darkest chapter. Looking back, Jimin realized that the greatest danger had never been being forgotten, but allowing fear to speak louder than faith. Jungkook discovered that protecting someone should never come at the cost of shutting them out, because true love and genuine friendship grow stronger when burdens are shared rather than hidden. Together they stepped into the future carrying not the weight of their past, but the wisdom it had given them, knowing that no misunderstanding would ever again be powerful enough to silence the truth between them. Their story became a timeless reminder that the deepest wounds can heal, broken trust can be restored, and relationships tested by hardship can emerge stronger than ever when hearts choose forgiveness over pride. And perhaps the most unforgettable lesson of all is this: before believing that someone has forgotten you, take one more step, ask one more question, and hold on for one more moment, because the truth waiting beyond the silence may be the very thing that saves the people you love. If this emotional journey touched your heart, let its message stay with you long after the story ends. Treasure the people who stand beside you, speak honestly before silence creates distance, and never underestimate the power of forgiveness. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not found in extraordinary moments, but in ordinary hearts willing to choose each other again after everything seems lost. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. May hope always guide your heart, may trust always be stronger than fear, and may every relationship you cherish find the courage to overcome even its darkest storms. Until our next story, take care of those you love, because tomorrow is never promised, but love, when protected with honesty and compassion, can last forever.